Guys, hello, it's time to take a quick dump because we have it on good authority that you shouldn't be on the toilet for longer than 12 minutes. So we've created these lovely little mini episodes for you to listen on the loo. And if the episode finishes and you haven't done your shit, you have to leave.
You ain't gotta go home, but you gotta get the hell out of that cubicle.
IBS is the most common disorder of gut-brain interaction. They used to be called functional GI disorders, but they were renamed. So IBS is probably the most well-known, but there's other things like functional constipation, functional dyspepsia. These are basically when someone has tummy issues and they've done a test, but that test has come back normal. So we give them that diagnosis based on a set of symptom criteria called Rome criteria. So for IBS, for example, it's based on tummy pain that happens at least once a week or more, and it has to be related to defecation, so like when you go to the toilet, and there's also changes in the bowel habit which can determine the subtype of IBS. So you can have IBS-C, constipation, IBS-D, diarrhea, and IBS-M, which is mixed, both basically. But IBS itself is multifactorial, meaning there's lots of different potential causes of it. So there's obviously the gut-brain connection in terms of a heightened, more sensitive gut. There's potentially an imbalance in gut bacteria. There's potential malabsorption so not absorbing and digesting your nutrients properly. There's probably an immune system involvement too. And one thing that ties all these together, which we have physiological, we can see the physiology behind it, is post-infectious IBS. So post-infectious IBS happens when you have an initial bout of gastroenteritis or food poisoning or traveller's diarrhea. And then after the initial infection subsides, you're left with chronic long-term tummy pain and bloating 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after that initial infection. So that initial infection would trigger an immune response in the gut. And what we think is there's sort of like a lingering heightened response. So even though the infection has subsided, the nervous system, like the enteric nervous system, which is what basically connects the gut to the brain, becomes more sensitive to the same stimulus. So what we see is in people who have food poisoning, tummy bugs, they can then become intolerant to foods that they weren't intolerant to before. So lactose intolerance is really common to develop after food poisoning. So basically it could be triggered by an initial infection, and then depending on a couple of factors, like if you're stressed at the time, that can increase your risk factor for developing post-infectious IBS. If you're a female, it increases your risk of developing post-infectious IBS. Also depends on the type of infection you have. So what kind of bug infection in the first place. So on average, it's about 1 in 10 people who develop gastroenteritis, whether that's from bacteria, viruses or parasites. On average, 1 in 10 people who get gastroenteritis, whether that's from bacteria, viruses or parasites. So 1 in 10 will go on to develop post-infectious IBS. So they'll still have symptoms a year later. But for Campylobacter, which is a bacteria that you can get from undercooked chicken and eggs, it's 1 in 5. So it's literally like rolling the dice to see whether in 12 months' time you'll still have a poorly tummy. Sometimes we don't pick up things on tests, but they give us the history that their IBS might have started after a bout of food poisoning or a tummy bug. So what we have to do in that case is try and work on that gut-brain connection, because that enteric nervous system, that vagus nerve, is in overdrive. So we need to try and calm that down. And then there might be some lingering sort of imbalance of bacteria in the gut, so we can try and target that with things like probiotics and prebiotics and diet. So lactose intolerance is pretty common. Around 2/3 of the world have some degree of lactose intolerance or lactase deficiency. So lactase is the enzyme that your gut produces to break down lactose. But we know that most people with lactose intolerance can actually handle about 6 to 12 grams of lactose. You don't need to give up cheese because there's quite a few cheeses that are naturally low in lactose, specifically aged cheeses. So the longer that cheese is aged for, the more fermentation, the more bacterial breakdown of the lactose, which means there's some cheeses that are virtually lactose free. So you've got blue cheese, you've got mature cheddar, so not mild, but mature and extra mature. Parmesan, virtually lactose free. You can actually build up a tolerance to lactose by consuming kefir. So kefir is a fermented milk, and the bacteria in the milk they produce lactase naturally to break down the lactose. So the more kefir you have, the more of these bacteria you get in your gut. And we've shown this in randomized control trials where people with lactose intolerance were able to tolerate more lactose. We pasteurize milk because of safety reasons. So pasteurization kills all of the bacteria, both the good and the bad. And I've already told you that getting a stomach bug is probably one of the worst things you can do for your gut health. And there's some data, so 10-year data from the US, which found that drinking raw or unpasteurized milk meant you were 840 times more likely to get sick than drinking pasteurized. But people who drink raw milk, so these raw milk advocates, claim there are health benefits to it. So they say you can drink it if you've got lactose intolerance and it builds up your intolerance to lactose. But again, I've already mentioned that you can do this with regular kefir. They also often say that it can reduce the chance of you developing things like allergies and atopy, like asthma and eczema, especially in children. And they usually quote this study of these children on a farm who basically had more access to raw milk and they had less allergies. We actually did a bit of a challenge a few weeks ago, so people who follow us on social media might have seen this, where we called it the Fermented 5. I basically got 4 of my mates from Manchester, so there's 5 of us in total, to do 5 servings of different fermented foods every day for 2 weeks to see if we could turbocharge our gut microbiome, so see if we could basically increase the diversity of our gut microbes, which is sort of the hallmark of gut health, because there isn't really a marker of gut health, but as the girls will know, because you did a lot of this, the more diverse microbiome you have, basically the better health it's associated with. So this 2 weeks sort of turbo drive of fermented foods ramped some of our gut microbiomes right up. I think, as you know, this is pretty embarrassing to say, but my score was very average at the start. Half of us saw a really big increase, a couple of others didn't, but everyone's different. They might have needed a bit more time, and everyone was really busy, so not everyone managed to hit the 5 every day. It's quite ambitious. When it comes to probiotics, what you want to know is if the specific strain in there has been shown at the dose to have benefits. So to identify that, there's a little hack you can do is look on the back of your probiotic box and you're looking for some letters or numbers after the name. So what we can see there is... So what we can see here is, for example, we have Bifidobacteria longum, which is the name, which is the bacteria, but for it to be a probiotic, we have here 35624, which is its strain identifier. So if you search that number, you can retrieve all of the studies which have been performed on that.